Well, I've enjoyed this across the state now that I get to speak behind these two passionate folks back about the business of education. So this is the time where we're going to allow you to ask some questions. We would ask that you identify yourself with your name and whatever school or county LEA you represent. I'll start it off by addressing two of the questions that we have been given, and then we'll turn it over to you. One, which is more of an elementary question, is will we add the third grade pretest back in so that there'll be more EVOS scores available for elementary? The answer is SAS is helping us work through this. Obviously, we do need a benchmark so that we will know if third grade teachers are growing, if the students are growing in third grade classrooms. So that is a discussion that we are having. How will we set the benchmark for third grade? So obviously, third grade pretest might be one of the ways that we could deal with that. The other is really, at break, we were given a card that addressed several issues, primarily content, depth, and resources. And so to summarize what's on the card, I sat there and sketched out what I thought would be an appropriate response, but I can't do it in science. I'll have to do it in social studies, because I'm a social studies, language arts teacher, and all of you science. It's a shame Angela's not standing up here because she was a biology teacher. So the question dealt with what content do we use to go deeper, and where do we get the resources, kind of synthesizing it. So the best thing I can do is give you an example. So let's say I'm an 8th grade social studies teacher teaching the Civil War, and I want to go deeper. Well, the first thing I want to do is make sure my students have the basic knowledge and understanding around the Civil War in our country. Then if I wanted to go deeper, then I have to look at the concept of the Civil War, not more battles, but the concept. So then what I might do is ask my students, well, let's compare Civil War in the United States to the Civil War in England in the 1600s, or the Civil War in France in the 1700s, or Vietnam in the 1950s and 60s, or even Egypt last spring. What is the notion of Civil War? And then if I wanted to go deeper in terms of writing, I would have the students write some kind of opinion, persuasive essay, comparing those civil wars across the world, using evidence from whatever they had read in articles that I had found on the students' grade level, or thus a little above, so that they would be challenged, but using evidence from what they had read. So the resources to go deeper are not always in the textbook. The teachers truly do have to have knowledge of content and an understanding of basic content in their area of study in order to truly go deeper. So deeper you don't typically find in textbooks. Deeper has to come out of that knowledge base that the teacher brings to the instruction. And then you integrate it with reading and writing and academic vocabulary. So resources are a challenge. But for depth, you truly do have the best resources. That's probably the articles, the resources you find on the internet that go along with the resources that you have in a textbook. So these are two topics that have been shared with us. Now we'd like anybody, we have microphones, anybody have questions that they'd like to ask about the processes that we've talked about today. It can be the standards, the assessment, accountability, teacher evaluation. What questions do you have that you'd like answered? I wouldn't have thought this was a shy group. Okay, some hands are up.
I'm Susan Sharon, a teacher of priority from Wake County. You kind of addressed it with the third grade pretest, but what about K1 and 2 EVOS data?
Okay, obviously we are going to need some type of summative data from grades K1 and 2. In fact, we keep hearing from educators across the state that in terms of second grade reading proficiency, that we don't think that our teachers really understand the level that second grade proficiency should be if students are going to be able to have the depth of reading understanding that they need. So we are looking at some way of documenting some summative information for grades K1 and 2. We will do our absolute best to make sure that it is developmentally appropriate. We don't see K1 and 2 children sitting down with bubble sheets, in rows and marking, but we do need some summative data. It's just a piece of information. We were very fortunate in our state. We're one of the few states that has a Race to the Top grant for K-12. We also earned the Early Childhood Race to the Top grant. So we will be creating a new readiness assessment for kindergarten students coming in, a new K-2 assessment. The funding is included in that proposal. So we're hoping with that grant, we will have resources to do some of this work. So you will be hearing, we don't have the answers yet, we just know that there is a need. And obviously, we're working with K-2 folks and early childhood folks to make sure that we do it well.
We had two questions. We had heard previously that there would be no results shared from the 2012-2013 assessments. Is this correct?
That is correct. You will not have results for the 2012-13 until the fall, because they're all new. Therefore, we have to set new standards, and the state board has to do that once all of the scores come in. So,
And our
yes, so
second
it will
question.
populate late for standard
Okay.
series.
Our second question pertains to that as well. How will EVOS growth be formulated for 12-13 since it's a new assessment?
It will be delayed, because they obviously will not be able to do the growth until we know what the standards are. And the next question that might follow this, and how will you know growth since you have new standards? We're able to do linking studies, so we'll be able to look at how students performed on the old assessments and then how students perform on the new. And statisticians can do their magic and figure out how a student would have grown had they been on the old standards. So yes, we'll be able to do a growth measure. It'll just take a little more time. One more question maybe? Yes.
Hi, Melanie Payne from Halifax County. Okay. Question for you. We were looking at standard 6 and 8. Will a teacher's test scores or student growth or achievement be counted in one building? Or what if that teacher were to move within North Carolina from one particular school to another? The same question for a principal.
As long as we have the data in the system, the data should be able to follow the teacher or the principal. Because growth can be calculated year by year, and therefore you should still be able to take 3 years of growth data and look at whether or not a teacher is bringing value or a principal is bringing value to a school. Now, the one thing we had not discussed, obviously there has to be some type of due process built into this and some kind of, we don't know yet exactly what to call it, but I'll give you an example. If a principal is sent to a school because it's a school that's in trouble, and the principal goes in during that first year and makes significant changes, then obviously the superintendent would know the context within which the principal moves. So there's always going to have to be the common sense equation that is applied to any of these processes, where principals and superintendents know the context within which people are sent to new places. And so obviously you may not expect to see growth that first year, because you put somebody in a situation where they're making significant change. That's where the common sense piece has to be applied, and we'll deal with that when we do the business rules around how this whole process will roll itself out, and that obviously is the last step in the process. So yes, we'll have to make allowances for any of those situations. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Atkins.
Before I summarize, I want to make sure that you know about the professional days and the 185 days. Last year, the General Assembly passed a law that said that students should be at school 185 days compared to where we had been 180 days. Also, as a part of that law was a provision that the State Board of Education could waive those 5 days if it could be shown that those days would be used in a way that would increase student achievement. Just at the last board meeting, the State Board of Education delegated to the state superintendent the authority to waive those 5 days if a school system committed to using those 5 days, or up to 5 days, for professional development related to the Common Core, the use of digital resources and devices, and response to instruction. So that means about every school district in the state has submitted a waiver, and we will be sending okays or approval for those waivers. So that means next year, those 5 days that you would have had to had students in the classroom can be used for your professional development. Is that good news? How many of you knew that before I told you? Okay, a few of you did. All right. Well, let me summarize. Imagine that it is a warm summer day and you are at your school with the person who came with you to this meeting, and you have just watched the last bus leave the school at the end of the day. And you start this conversation. You say, do you remember on March 12, 2012, when we attended a seminar at the McKimmon Center? Yes. And do you remember that those great comments by our Teacher of the Year and our Principal of the Year? Yes. And do you remember they talked about that instructional improvement system, and I wondered how in the world will that really help me? And then here I know that there are teachers all across the school who really see how the instructional improvement system saves time, and that means that teachers can spend more time with students. And remember the teacher and principal evaluation, and I will say doubting Thomas about how that could be a continuous improvement model. But here it is, 2015, and the remodeling effort is almost done. And isn't it wonderful that we, 100,000 strong team of educators, are going to the biggest rally ever held in North Carolina. And the reason why we're going to that rally of 100,000 strong is that we are nearly at a 100% graduation rate. And we have just seen nearly all of our students deemed career and college ready. Won't that be a great event when all of us show up in 2015 for that celebration? And in order for all of us to show up for that evaluation, we need something from you. In my church, we always have an opportunity for people to make a commitment. So today I'm going to ask you to make 2 commitments. Number 1, we want you to be committed to sending us your emails, your tweets and Twitters, your telephone calls, your email messages about what questions you have, what issues you see, the knobs on the cabinet, remember? All of those issues, we want you to send that to us so that we can frame our April webinars and other opportunities for us to move forward with our remodeling. And the second thing we want you to do as a commitment is to go back to your school, use the information that we have given you, use the CD, use the resource on internet to share this information with all of the faculty at your school, and subsequently with your parents and students at your school. And then get feedback from them and share it with us about how we can improve our blueprints, how we can improve the remodeling, and how we can pay attention to the details of the knobs on the cabinets. And if you are willing to be committed to those 2 areas, will you please stand and leave? Thank you so much for coming today.